So guys, I'm just going to cover 3 essays for you today. So I've taken this from Edexcel Economics A, paper 2. So there aren't that many questions that could come up in this exam on Monday because they've reduced the information so much for the advanced information that's been given to you. So I'm focusing on the questions that could come up as I think that's going to be the most useful for you. I'm just going to run through the essays only. These are the classic points. I'm going to be quite quick about it, so hopefully at this point it's just last minute revision, but if you are struggling to see a nice model answer, then this would be something for you to take a look at. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. Okay, so this is another question. This one's about income distribution and wealth distribution. As I said, this is another one of the questions that may come up in Monday's exam. So it's in Brazil. We've got an income Gini coefficient of 0.449, ranked number 2 in the world for its wealth inequality as well. So income and wealth inequality, obviously slightly different things, which you should definitely comment on. If it gives you 2 variables or 2 factors like this, income and wealth distribution, if you fail to comment on one of them, then you will be capped, I think, to the second band probably. So just make sure you address all elements of the question. So it's asking for economic causes of both income and wealth inequalities within a country such as Brazil. So please do not forget to talk about everything there. Right, so first of all, in my intro, I'm clearing up all the terms that I believe are necessary, relevant to the question. So in this case, we've got the Gini coefficient. This does need to be cleaned up a bit, so I'm going to immediately bring in my Lorenz curve diagram. So we're taking the area A over A plus B, and we find the value of 0.449. So obviously the Lorenz curve just is the one, oh sorry, that's actually not correct. It's this one here where you've got this kind of curve and you've got percentage cumulative population here, percentage cumulative income up there, and obviously the further back this line is going, then it's not great. We want to be on this perfect line of equality. So just take some time to explain that basically. So all of this here, this is simply my knowledge mark. So I'm not actually looking at answering the question just yet. I'm basically clearing up, defining terms that need to be defined and any such things like that basically. So on to the next paragraph. So in this first paragraph, I'm immediately going to introduce one cause of income inequality. Okay, so I want to make it really clear that I'm focused on income inequality here, not wealth, and that's going to help me keep track of what points I'm making. Okay, so make sure you're just specifying what it is. And the first point is a regressive tax system. So anytime I bring in economics-y language, things like Gini coefficient, or in this case regressive income tax system, I want to be really clear and define immediately what this actually means. So I'm saying this means that lower income individuals pay a high proportion of their income in tax. What does this result in? So how does this link to being a cause of income inequality? Well, the gap between the low and high income individuals will widen because obviously lower income paying higher tax and so on. All indirect taxes are also by nature regressive. I'm bringing in it also, you know, I always like to recommend you bring in additional information to show further analysis. So all consumers, again, I'm now explaining how indirect taxes are regressive. So all consumers pay the same tax on expenditure. And so this can be a further cause of increasing inequality. So this language I'm using, a cause, I'm just repeating the question words again and again, just to show that I am on track. This problem can be exacerbated if there are indirect taxes levied on necessities. So here I'm just giving extra analysis. When is this more of a problem? So this could also be considered evaluation because you're looking at the significance of different causes of inequality, such as energy, utility, or foodstuffs. Anytime you are able to give an example, give an example. Aside from regressive taxation, a lack of other fiscal policies that could redistribute income more equally might also be a cause of inequality in Brazil. Repeating the question word, and then straight into I'm giving some examples when I can. So policies such as direct provision of housing can also act to reduce inequality. You could also say things like a national minimum wage or whatever it might be. So the next paragraph is always going to be evaluation straight away. I always say KAA, evaluate, just to make sure you've got enough of both. So the significance of poor fiscal policy in causing inequality will depend on the magnitude of their taxes and indeed whether these taxes are paid. So significance is one of my favorite evaluation points actually, because it just means that you're giving really careful thought to the different points in your own essay that you are deciding, and you know that one is more important than the other. So obviously, if there is a large informal economy, which is going to be the case in these countries such as Brazil, where they have lots of different types of industry, we'll see no impact of changing taxation to inequality, as income or transactions may not be officially reported. And then another cause of income inequality in Brazil might be due to, so this is my second KAA point now, might be due to varying levels of education or healthcare available to its population. So again, I'm immediately going to explain the link. So higher levels of education leads to workers becoming more skilled and therefore able to earn a higher lifetime income compared to individuals who were not able to complete or receive a low quality of education. I could stop there, but I want to explain why people are not receiving that education, because that could also speak to why there's increasing income inequality. So we've got a lack of access or need to work to support their families, and some individuals may be in a poverty trap that can be difficult to break out of without government intervention. Similarly, so I always like to tie in education and healthcare together as factors that affect inequality, but they have slightly different impacts. So with education, it affects lifetime income. With healthcare, it's going to affect your productivity. And obviously productivity, you can earn a higher income for fewer labor hours, again widening gap between healthier and less healthy individuals. And then again, here is my evaluation paragraph straight away. And what I'm talking about here is that access to healthcare and education is more likely separated by a rural-urban divide. So because urban areas are receiving more investment from the public and private sector due to high levels of demand and where industry is located, etc., it means that instead of healthcare and education really being the determining factor causing income inequality, it's actually whether you're in a rural area and an urban area, and then sort of a cofactor that what exists there, the characteristics of these areas basically means you then get income inequality. So I think that's a really nice point to talk about if you get this kind of essay in the exam. And then I'm just emphasizing that in urban areas, there are also higher wages, a greater pool of jobs, so even greater income inequality. Anything which is going to basically strengthen your point, make it that much better, is always necessary to put. That is what they really want to see in terms of your analysis and evaluation. So final paragraph here, I'm talking about wealth inequality. There are fewer factors, I think, that are worth discussing at the A-level stage for wealth inequality. So I'm specifying here because I want to make sure I'm getting full marks in that exam. So one cause is going to be due to political instability or corruption. So what does this mean? A big cause of inequality, wealth inequality, is that we're not basically using these public funds, which is government spending, on areas that can improve the standards of living for their population, which would allow them to then get jobs, which allows them to then get build up wealth. But when you don't have these things, then it's very difficult for the population to build up wealth. So furthermore, governments may be implementing policies that cause the wealth inequality to persist. So what I mean by that is mansion taxes and inheritance taxes. When these are taxed high, they automatically redistribute income to the between over the population, but when they're low, it allows the rich to stay rich, basically. So when these levels are not set appropriately or not implemented at all, the wealth gap will increase. This is because those who hold assets will continue to see the value of their assets rise without paying a tax to reduce their wealth. Now, one point I wish I had made here is that a corrupt government would mean that this is less likely to happen. I feel like it's kind of, I've kind of made the point, but I could have been a lot stronger with that and said that more political instability is likely to support these types of policies not being introduced because it's likely those politicians themselves hold assets. Okay, and then finally, persistent income inequality will lead to increasing wealth inequality, kind of implied here, but you know, we can repeat it, and vice versa. Because income comes from wages, rents, interest, and dividends, thus those who hold a high level of assets, such as housing, stocks, or bonds, wages, rents, dividends, whatever, can benefit from increasing income over time, which will allow them to purchase more assets, and so the cycle continues. I am missing a conclusion, which I hope you know that you should definitely put. So anything just to summarize your main points and say, therefore, you know, there are varying causes of income and wealth inequality, but the most significant would be, or something like that, just to tie it in all together. Another thing I think I've missed is that I probably should have defined wealth and income up here in the intro. Another potential thing that I could have put is that maybe me focused it more toward Brazil. because it is asking for countries such as Brazil. I think I've done that to some extent by commenting on political instability and potentially sort of this thing about an informal economy, but I think I could have been a lot clearer there. However, obviously the points are still here, the structure's still here, the analysis is still there. Count the number of connectives and things that I put in there should be sufficient. Right guys, so final essay that I've identified as something that could come up in Monday's exam. So we've got Japan's budget deficit for 2017-18 is expected to be 4.6% of GDP. Its national debt is forecast to increase to above 250% of GDP by 2019. Evaluate the impact of a large fiscal deficit and national debt on a country's economy. So two things. One is that, as I said before, it's asking for both the fiscal deficit and national debt, which means, again, ignoring one of these will result in you being capped, so please be careful. Again, it is centered on Japan, but it does say a country's economy, so we don't necessarily have to focus purely on Japan. It is evaluate the impact question, therefore it is likely we want to split in some way or another into positive and negative. In this case, with fiscal debt and national debt, it's not necessarily good or bad, it's more like, is it a problem or is it not a problem, basically. Okay, so straight into it. In the intro, what do we have here? I'm going to comment on the extract that's given and also clear up what the definitions of these words actually are. So a fiscal deficit is when exists when government spending is greater than taxation, and then national debt is the accumulated budget deficits and therefore the outstanding amount owed by the state. And the one comment I've made is just that the budget deficit must be persistent if national debt is continuing to increase. So what I mean is that if we had a surplus, then national debt should fall, but in this case, no. So we're basically seeing consistent budget deficits. Okay, language-wise, I'm starting straight away with one impact, okay? And in this case, I'm talking about the national debt. So you can see later on, I specify here fiscal deficit, an impact of a fiscal deficit. So I just want to be really clear in my writing what I'm talking about. So my first point is there is an opportunity cost of debt repayment. Interest payments and repayments must be made on the national debt level. Because I've introduced an economics-y sort of phrase, again, I'm explaining it immediately. And then what does this do into my analysis now? This reduces the spending the government could be making on infrastructure, such as healthcare or education. All of these are impacts, okay? So it's basically explaining the impact of there being an opportunity cost of debt repayment. So this could therefore reduce the standard of living for consumers. So you can see I've said the impact is less opportunity cost of debt repayment, therefore the impact is less spending on infrastructure, therefore the impact of that is lower standard of living for consumers. So whenever it's an impact, the impact needs to be on someone. So it either needs to be on consumers, producers, government, something, the economy, whatever. So just be really clear that there is some sort of object you're landing on. Alternatively, the government might suffer from growing fiscal deficits if they choose not to reduce their spending in other areas to offset debt repayment. So either they're going to reduce their spending or the fiscal deficit's increasing. So I'm kind of linking those two ideas together. Furthermore, so anytime you see furthermore, you can basically be sure to yourself, I am analyzing in some level of detail. So this debt must be repaid in the future. So what is the effect of that? Intergenerational inequality, because the future generations take on the burden of paying for the spending made today. What does that mean? A further fall in the standard of living for future generations as they're constrained in their ability to spend on services to support the population. So that's my analysis there, is that another impact is going to be further inequality in the future. However, so we've seen that, so we know, okay, my evaluation is in there. This is assuming that the national debt persists into the future. Obviously, if you have fiscal surpluses consecutively, then that's going to reduce the debt and therefore the problem and therefore the impact, okay? Right, next paragraph, going straight into it, is a second impact. Again, I like to do my language in that way just to make sure I'm really covering all the points they want me to cover. So a second impact of a large fiscal deficit is that there is a crowding out effect. This is a classic point to make. I basically think I've covered all the classic points. So if you get this essay, just use these points. So what is the crowding out effect? Again, I've mentioned in economic terms, so I am going to explain it. The crowding out effect occurs when high levels of government borrowing reduces the potential for private sector investment. And then I'm going to go one step further and do diagrams. Diagrams always elevate your essay to a higher band of writing, especially when they're more complex diagrams, and crowding out effect diagrams are more complex. So it's an increase in demand in the loanable funds market, causing the interest rate to increase from I1 to I2. This increases the cost of borrowing for the private sector, reducing investment as seen on the investment schedule diagram from Y1 to Y2. So what's the conclusion here on what's the effect on impact here? So private sector investment is likely to be more efficient in increasing potential output of the economy. Why? Due to the profit incentive. Thus, this can further constrain future growth of the economy. What are we going to see? What are our impacts? Lower real output, possibly deflation in the future. So I'm always linking it back to what are my impacts, okay? Right, my evaluation paragraph now. So, however, the government could also be incurring a deficit in order to invest into infrastructure that could have positive impacts on the economy in the long run. So obviously, if we have investment in services to improve education, to improve healthcare, more productive workforce, make more exports more competitive, these are all different impacts I'm outlining, and you can see these are more positive now. So positive and negative, obviously, this is the evaluation point. Previously as well, I was saying, well, the debt could be a problem, it might not be a problem. So impact always separate into that kind of format. Investment in services such as high quality education, blah, blah, blah. Thus, if the government deficit exists due to increased capital spending rather than current spending, there could be a positive impact overall. Okay, so I'm just bringing in that question word again. Final impacts, I always stick to about like 3-4 paragraphs really. Another impact of a fiscal deficit is that, well, simply put, government spending is a component of aggregate demand. Fiscal deficit means increasing AD, means increasing real output and price level. Again, there's the positive effects. We can see that on the diagram below where AD shifts to AD2, leading to increased output Y2. So as I said, anything sort of to do with diagrams, you have to kind of incorporate into your essay. It's not enough to just sort of drop it in there and walk away. So this increase in economic growth should mean higher standard of living, combined with lower levels of employment. The economy is likely to be closer to meeting its macroeconomic objectives. And then I'm just going to fit in one more analysis and say, furthermore, multiplier effect. I always talk about the multiplier effect. It's such easy, nice little marks that's always in the mark scheme, which means an initial injection leads to a greater overall increase in the output of the economy. Obviously, government spending is an injection, okay? Final paragraph here, so this is going to be my another evaluation point. So what I'm saying here is, as long as the government has the means to repay, incurring debt is not necessarily a problem. Obviously, if all countries have massive amounts of debt, isn't necessarily a problem. Could be, could not be. That's what this question is really all about. If you've got high credit ratings and you're able to borrow money, people demand your bonds, then you're generally fine, And so in this case, it may be beneficial for the country to borrow in order to invest today. Again, I am missing a conclusion. Just one thing to say, there are both positive and negative impacts. Just summarizing what's going on, and just say overall the impact is going to be negative at this particular proportion of GDP. Debt level is too high, okay? So as I mentioned in the first essay, I'm sorry that was really fast. I am just trying to get this out before your exam. But as much as possible, if there's an economics term, you define it. Diagrams incorporate. Make sure you're using the right language. One impact, one cause, repeating the question word. We're going analysis paragraph and then evaluation. In our analysis paragraph, by using things like furthermore, also, you can ensure you're doing it to the appropriate level. Don't forget your conclusion. Try to be sensible in your points. Use the classic points. This essay, I would say, if you get a deficit debt essay, just use the points I've made here. They're very classic. They're always going to be accepted. So I hope that is useful for you. There's not too much time, so I would say just memorize some of these essays I've put in here. Looking at the other paper questions, I don't foresee any sort of really different questions to this coming up, purely because the advanced information has cut that down so much, okay? So please let me know if you've got any last minute questions before the exam and anything else that you might want to see. Thanks.